Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for coming today. There's a lot of people here who've never been to a Digital Irish event, so it's lovely to see some fresh faces. My name is Jack Stenson. I'm one of the committee of 9. If you can ask everyone maybe in the committee to put your hand up. So we have a few people here who across startup investment, corporates who interact with startups, people who are working in innovation in London. But for people who don't know, Digital Irish began 10 years ago in New York. In New York, we do, there's a New Yorker getting excited. Digital Irish began 10 years ago in New York as a place where the Irish innovation community could connect in New York. We do one event a month, except for July and August, on everything from femtech to retail tech to sustainability. It's very much the focal point of the Irish Startup Network in New York. And what we're trying to do in London is emulate a bit of that. So figure out what London needs in terms of the Irish business community, the innovation community, the startup community, and try and figure out what we're going to do here. First event of the year here in London, so you're very welcome. We're hoping to do 4 events this year. That's the goal. Start off bite-sized, and we'll see where we go. But also, just a little bit of news for everyone in the room. On last week, we had the Global Irish Innovation Forum in Dublin, where myself and Sinead there were attended in Dublin Castle. And long story short, the Department of Foreign Affairs has asked Digital Irish to be the global glue for the Irish community around the world. So if anyone here has moved country before, often, starting life fresh can be a big challenge. You don't know where the starting point is to have a successful and happy life when you move country. So what we want to do is get the list of all Irish organisations around the world and have a central point where if you move to Sydney, Australia, click on that. Do you want to get involved in the business community, sport, culture, charity, whatever it might be? And then, hey presto, there's the list of organisations. And Digital Irish is going to be at the centre of that. We agreed on Thursday, Friday at the pub in Dublin. This is what we do. And the team in New York built an MVP over the weekend because they were that excited. So very exciting stuff to come. Also, to put my other hat on, I work for BT here. I'm the head of startup scouting in Europe for the corporate venture arm of BT. Peter here beside me is also in that team. I look at drones investment deals and partnerships, and Peter is leading stuff in electric vehicles. But the reason BT is hosting this is because we're a team called Etc. because we focus on the other stuff, not telco. And we're looking at health tech, fintech, drones, electric vehicles primarily. And we're trying to move BT into new markets, new revenues in new markets by partnering with some really innovative startups, as well as building our own technology internally. So that's why BT is hosting this evening. And also, the booze down the back is sponsored by AWS, who are Digital Irish sponsors. So the AWS people in the room might not have known that.
Thank you, Astrid.
But globally as well, the Department of Foreign Affairs and McEntee solicitors are global sponsors for Digital Irish. But anyway, there's the parish notes. You're all very welcome. And I'm just going to hand over now to our host and moderator of the evening, Alan. And hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Joe. Hi everyone, I'm Alan Gleeson. I'm a bit perturbed because I've got 3 panelists, but one is going to be a virtual panelist. So I've got Peter ready to go to make sure that works smooth and seamlessly. So on my left, I want to start with Alan Holland. He's the founder and CEO of Keelvar. Keelvar is an award-winning category leader in global software vendor, optimizing over $200 billion in spend annually for large and mid-sized clients. You've been involved with machine learning for probably over 20 years, I suspect. So, yeah, back when it was called something else.
Yeah, I guess I was a lecturer in AI in University College Cork after doing a PhD from 2005 through to late 2012. And yeah, I was in an AI research group that's actually quite large. It was larger than the Department of Computer Science with 50 full-time researchers, and there's only 25 full-time faculty. And not many people realize, and a bit of a well-kept secret in Cork, that it was only behind MIT and Stanford in terms of AI publications, the top tier AI journalists for over 10 years, right? So it was really top notch. It was all the best. The guys who wrote the textbooks on AI were all in Cork during that period. But nobody knew it because AI wasn't that sexy like that. We actually struggled to get taught. When I was lecturing, I was in charge of a top master's program in intelligent systems, largely focused on AI. We couldn't get students to register for it. It was incredible. I was trying to evangelize that, this is the future, guys. This is like all the software systems you're using. First gen software is all about tools that humans use, but then it'll be about software agents that use the tools and will do so in a manner that will outperform human experts. And that's kind of I suppose, as someone who's spent their life working in AI, it's kind of obvious that this was the way, but it was falling on deaf ears. So moved into business then 10 years ago.
Brilliant.
Speak more about that later, I guess.
Sounds great. If you could pass the mic to Matt on your left. So Matt is an early stage investor at Plug and Play. Plug and Play is the most active early stage investor in the world and the world's largest innovation platform. Matt, do you want to add anything to that, just to kind of enrich it a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not going to pull my credentials in front of Alan, who obviously has a very exceptionally AI-focused background and is quite a figure in the field. But quickly about myself and Plug and Play. So software engineer by trade, have not been working on AI systems specifically, but sort of last 5 or 6 years was working building trading systems for investment banks. After that, jumped into the VC world, now looking primarily at AI deals like most early stage VCs. So hopefully can add some value in terms of the investor side of things. Plug and Play quickly. You covered it pretty well there. One of the most active early stage investors in the world, about 200 to 250 investments a year across pre-seed and seed. We invest primarily in B2B SaaS. If anyone's a founder in the room raising a pre-seed or a seed round, come and have a chat. I might have to dash off quickly after that, but you'll have my details, so please get in touch. And I'll pass the virtual mic maybe back to you and to Patricia.
Perfect. Next up, this is going to be interesting. Patricia, can you hear us okay?
I can, just about. Hopefully it's going to work.
Okay, great. So you're Ireland's AI ambassador, which is a phenomenal title. You're the founder and executive chair of SoapBox Labs, a voice recognition software for children. That may not be doing it justice, but maybe give us a tiny overview as to your background.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I'm an engineer. I'm in the space of speech recognition and AI for nearly 25 years now. I have a PhD in speech recognition and AI going back as nearly as long. And so after my PhD, I've worked in big tech. I've worked in academia for a while, then I worked in big tech, working for IBM and Bell Labs, which is then Nokia Bell Labs. And then I left in 2013 to found SoapBox. I'd spent my whole career at that point working in speech recognition, but what I discovered when watching my own daughter interacting with technology, realized I've been working in the field of adult speech recognition, unbeknownst to myself and a lot of other people in the field, and it was very different for kids. So recognizing there was quite a significant gap in the market for child-specific speech recognition based on different voices, language, behaviors of kids. I founded the company in 2013, so we're 10 years going now. We have 37 people now in Dublin, or primarily in Dublin. And we license our technology to third parties like Scholastic, McGraw-Hill, who integrate our technology into their products and services for children, predominantly in the education space right now. And then since in the last year or so, as I said, I'm Ireland's first AI ambassador, which is kind of interesting. So I get to, it's kind of a role that helps to start a national conversation on AI, help demystify AI, speak to policymakers, government, civil service, businesses. I was just in Paris the last few days, meeting with the OECD and UNESCO on different AI policies. And I get to sit in a couple of other really interesting industry advisory boards like the Adapt Research Centre as well. And I do a bit of my own angel investing as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to kick off with a question. Patricia, when it comes to you, I'll say your name because it's difficult to read it otherwise in terms of you're not sitting here next to us. Alan, I'll start with you. AI has been around a long time, but ChatGPT seems to have finally achieved cut through. Why is that? So you've talked about your credentials over 20 odd years, but now people are actively talking about AI. So what is it with ChatGPT in particular that's sort of, I guess, led to this mass
Yeah, I think that there's been a track of work in generative AI going back. It started with deep learning, right? And the with the advent of the move to cloud computing, there was an explosion in the AWS are here. I can relate to this, that suddenly there was a different, it offered a different dynamic and accessibility to large scale computing power, where you could throw much bigger problems at it and have a corpus of information that was vast. And it was inconceivable that you could try and train these extremely complex models with, it was just inconceivable until that hardware became available. So there's a confluence of that work that was being done. I would say that, and the scope and ambition of it was much smaller when it started. There was maybe a few people who were close to it, Sam Altmans and these guys who had a sense for what it could achieve and were perhaps behind closed doors working on it and building confidence, but they could also see the risks involved in it. And so I think there's a few competitors were, and staff moved between these companies too. So there was increasing confidence that a breakthrough, kind of like a moon landing moment was going to occur. But it was always likely to occur with a bolder startup who didn't have a potential reputation to burn, right? Because it can go wrong. And whilst it's a fantastic opportunity, there are so many dangers associated with it too. And I think when it became available, and I'd say 3 and 3.5, sorry, my phone starts ringing wrong time. When we got to a certain level where you cross a certain threshold where you can wow the reader or the viewer with text or imagery, that kind of, it almost creates a sense of disbelief. Is this for real? And once you get to that wow moment, and once the effectiveness crosses that threshold, it's like a firestorm takes off. Then everyone starts telling their friends, "You got to try this out, and you got to see this," and it's just generated a wave of interest. But what I would say is I would caution that anybody who's working in AI for 25 years or more, we've seen AI summers and winters, and there's been excessive hype and there's been excessive pessimism at various times in the cycle. But the cycles are getting more complex because there's different subfields of AI on their own hype cycles. And we have machine vision that was everyone's very excited about a couple of years ago when we were thinking autonomous cars are coming. They're about, don't buy your car this year because next year it might be obsolete, right? But I suppose for tech to solve the inevitable problems that will become emergent in the next weeks and months as we see abuses of this technology, which there will be many, because it's out there, it's in the wild now. Policymakers are going to have to start reacting fast, and because the technology is moving very, very quickly. But so it'll crest and it'll fall. And people will think, oh, no, it won't work, but it is going to work, and it is going to change. A lot of professions are going to be impacted by these type of technologies. And it's hard, if you were to ask me which professions and just how, it's very hard for anyone to answer that definitively. I think you can only really speak to the domains you know yourself best to get a sense as to how, like we're in B2B commerce. So if an accountant was to come to me and say, how's it going to change accounting? I couldn't say for sure because I just don't know enough about accounting to say that. And likewise for marketing tech and so on. So that's why we have people like investors to try and analyze all of these things and speak to the likely impact. But it will be profound. And there will be other subfields of AI where there's going to be just as profound an impact in the coming years too. So yeah, we're going to hear more and more about AI.
And I guess the fact it's free, obviously this application is free, right? The OpenAI, but I use it daily, right? I'm not paying a license. Plus the access to data sets. I mean, that's probably another key point in terms of the internet as your data set, right?
Yes, and like many interesting data sets lie behind closed doors too. So it's when like Bloomberg have started applying it, and that's when things start to get really interesting, when companies with access to proprietary data are also start selling insights into that. Then it's hard to imagine the scale and scope of the impacts in different domains, but it's gonna be big, yeah.
Matt, just picking up on a couple of points Alan made there, I guess wearing your investor hat on it, right? So, you know, it's almost, and I was talking with someone earlier and they were kind of making this point, it's almost too hard to fathom all the kind of options. How do you guys evaluate real commercial opportunities with AI? Because it's very tempting for a startup to badge themselves as an AI startup because it'll jack up valuations and so on. So how do you guys kind of filter through the noise, as it were, when there's an explosion of different use cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think also just to add one more thing to what Alan said previously about the cut through of ChatGPT. I mean, in the history of language models, I know that's not a long history, but most of the developers and the labs focusing on this kind of stuff have been very research focused, whereas OpenAI really came out with quite a consumer focused product. ChatGPT itself was fine tuned specifically to be a chatbot for users, and DeepMind weren't focusing on building something they could sell, to 100 million monthly active users at the point when OpenAI released that. So it's just important to remember that one of the reasons OpenAI are so prevalent right now is because they shifted their business model, went private, and profit incentivized and tried to build a consumer product, and they did, really successful one. In terms of what we're looking at, how we filter out that stuff, it's no company can, hopefully no good VC will ever invest in a company that labels themselves as an AI company and are not. You would hope that anyone deploying capital, it has the expertise to look at a founder, look at their product, and figure out whether they're just plugging into ChatGPT, GPT-3, GPT-4 to get an answer to a question, but they're just making API calls with no defensibility. The key for us investing in these companies is it's all defensibility. We have no idea what's going to come in the next 6 weeks, let alone 3 months, let alone 3 years in terms of language models. And if you're building a startup and raising funding on an AI business model, you have to have defensibility for more than 6 months. You can't build a product with no defensibility. So it's, most of the investments that most early stage VCs are making are the application layer implementations of AI. So we're not investing, most of the capital is not going to, challenges to OpenAI. They're going to, verticals, it doesn't have to be vertical specific, but they're going to business, use case specific applications of AI where there's not just language models required, but it's like you've got another set of development tasks that you have to achieve, or some proprietary data that you already have that will account for your defensibility. And that's the most important thing, I'd say.
That makes sense. And actually, Alan, turning to you, and then I'll come to you, Patricia. I mean, you've obviously raised Series C, right? So I guess you've gone through the process on a B round as well with VCs, and probably they were interrogating you on this this very point, right?
I had a board meeting just this afternoon where I think VCs are just trying to hoover up information on what does this mean, and what kind of tech companies are going to be impacted negatively. Are you guys impacted? So I try and, I suppose what I said to them in our case is that we're in B2B trade, and our business, I can only speak to our own business, where we support negotiations between big buying organizations and suppliers. There are applications where you need certainty over the information and accountability. So every software provider needs to be thinking, what areas of our app could benefit from this technology? What could we do? So in our case, many of our users would be issuing RFQs and invites to compete for business, but they might have documents attached. So it's like use ChatGPT to do a 200-word summary of this procurement process. And there's ways in which, if you get that wrong, it's not critical, because you can caveat it and say, this is an automated summary. Read the documents if you want something reliable. But you also, right, we've got autonomous sourcing bots that then actually figure out who to go to market. We don't ask ChatGPT to suggest some suppliers to invite, because big companies tend to have qualified suppliers, so they have the proprietary list of suppliers. They have tested and certified and can work with them. So again, like, no, we couldn't use that for supplier selection or supplier invites, but you also have your sourcing strategy and what kind of pace of competitive sourcing event are you going to use? Could you use AI? So you have to think through all the steps and say, no, you wouldn't want that either. Instead, we apply narrow AI, so it's kind of field of algorithmic mechanism design. Never heard about it in the papers, but when you start hearing, maybe in 6 months or 12 months, you start seeing news stories about large multinationals having machine-to-machine negotiations with their suppliers and automatically recalibrating their supply chains. When something like a carrier blocks the Suez Canal, you have bots reconfiguring your supply chain to automatically source transportation elsewhere. So you see some companies that are unaffected because they moved in minutes to fix the situation before their competitors who are still reliant on manual process. So you start to see, and then they'll be pointing towards AI. So that's not going to be mass market stuff, but B2B trade is huge, so it's very impactful. So there's so many. Healthcare is huge applications, and entertainment. You can go on with the range of different innovations that are going to hugely impact areas of our lives. It's endless, right? So it's like you really need to think about. Internet only started 25 years ago. We're in the start, this is chapter 1 still, right? And there's many more chapters, and the pace of change is actually accelerating, not decelerating. So I wouldn't like to be VC trying to guess where this is going.
Yeah, no, I agreed on that one. Patricia, I'm going to come to you now and touch on, you mentioned in your intro about sort of government involvement and being in Paris, right? And I guess regulation is where I'm getting at, right? Because how can we regulate against bad AI when most governments tend to lag, entrepreneurs by years? So, this is real cutting edge stuff. And with all due respect, whether it's Irish or British politicians or European politicians, in many instances, they are way behind the curve on this sort of stuff. So how do you think we think about things like bad AI, right, and regulating? Because it's clear that the tool is very powerful, but it can be put to bad use as well as good use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the fortunate position we're in is that the EU AI Act has been under negotiations the past 2 years. And, as a lot of people in the space for a long time know, it's not that ChatGPT and the large language models weren't imagined and foretold. It's possibly the pace of them that's kind of been surprising, and the widespread utility given the user interface that was provided by ChatGPT, and that's kind of been the most surprising bit. So the EU AI Act actually has all this in play. It's under the last couple of months of negotiation. It'll be finalised by the end of the year and be rolled out the next year or two. So it's not. If the US haven't done anything about it, they did publish a US AI Bill of Rights, which actually details the framework under which you build. You should be building an AI, an ethical AI. An ethical AI is simply just put a human at the center and think about that and how your AI may negatively affect their life if it goes wrong. So everybody's kind of freaking out a little bit about it. People are saying we need to regulate, and then you've got on the other side, you've got people saying no, don't regulate stifles innovation. Right? So you've got two very disparate camps. But in view of the EU AI Act, what it's actually looking to do is regulate high-risk use cases. So high risk is where AI will affect somebody in terms of employment. It was used for candidate screening, and those underlying large language models pretty much just sucked in the internet. And we all know the internet can be a cesspool, basically. There's a huge amount of racism and sexism and bias and all this. And also historically, if you were to just look in all the employment outcomes over the last 40, 50 years, you wouldn't get a very fair system. You'd get a lot of biases, right? So when these, if you actually think about the use case of employment, in the financial sector, if you're using AI to determine who gets a loan and who doesn't, if you're using it in education to determine grades or performance, or let's say, who gets promoted, who doesn't, if you're using it in medical, if you're using healthcare, Anywhere and in law enforcement, people try to use before to automatically assign a sentencing based on prior information. You can imagine how that went like over the last couple of decades. So the regulation will pertain to high risk use cases, and everything else will be kind of self-assessed. So it's actually not really going to stifle innovation in some ways. On the other side, it's on its way, it's not here yet. But what does make it interesting is it has teeth, because there's an EU AI Liability Act that's going in tandem, and that's going to put the onus of proof back on the companies making it. Now, the bit that's a little bit unclear right now, and it's been discussed at the EU level, is LLMs, these ChatGPTs, the OpenAI, the GPT-4, are called general purpose. So it's generative AI, it's creating content, but it's also called general purpose AI, because what it's doing is it can be used across pretty much all industries, any manner of productivity tools, etc. And they are, what's under discussion right now is where the liability lies. So if you are to, it's not OpenAI so far, it's you using OpenAI, but then that opens up a can of worms for us. So supposing you've got a non-tech company and people are using it for productivity, and then some bright spark decides to shorten their day and use it for candidate screening. But if you think about how easy it is to use the interface of ChatGPT, that person, they're not a techie, they don't really know much about AI, they may not even realize what they're doing is in violation of a high-risk use case under the EU AI Act. But the company they work for is certainly liable for it if somebody takes a case against them. So, you know, the way you can see how that's playing out. So the bad actor stuff, we talk about like disinformation, trying to sway elections, which, to be honest, next year, US election, last time they were doing it with like hundreds of people writing Facebook's posts and, you know, the Russian misinformation campaign. Now it's going to be automated. So you can imagine how much fun that's going to be trying to catch that, like auto GPT creating disinformation. So bad actors are already probably violating the law anyway. So of course that's going to be hard to do. And now what's going to happen is bad actors at scale. So
which is kind of
somebody's outside the law anyway. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, as a follow-on question, there's a couple of things spring to mind. Obviously, the signal versus noise type concept, whereby, you know, the noise is going to get noisier, it seems, if content is able to be produced almost to zero, right? So that's going to be an interesting one. I can already see, you can see that with LinkedIn all of a sudden kicking off with a lot more requests that seem to be similarly phrased, or people writing blogs that are clearly just being pulled from ChatGPT, right? So all of a sudden, a lot more content. That's just one tiny example. Patricia, I was going to ask you about China, right? Because obviously it's a global kind of context, right? You've mentioned the US, you've mentioned Europe. You know, maybe does anyone else know? Maybe start with you, Patricia. Is China participating in these discussions, or is it sort of doing its own thing?
That's interesting. China are subscribed to UNESCO. So the UNESCO have recommendations around ethical AI that actually all countries agree to, including China and Russia. But a cynical person could say they agree to them because they want all the other countries to comply with them, and then maybe, you know, to be honest, full compliance will slow you down a little, but I really don't think it slows you down that much. And then they just don't bother in their own country. But they would rather everybody else just go through regulation because they get some kind of advantage that way. Of course, it's going to be an issue. I mean, and the weird thing about all this is it's borderless. So, you know, the EU can do whatever they want about regulating stuff, but if you go on the internet, product available, you start using it, you can't really regulate against that if the country of origin of that company is in China or Russia or somewhere that isn't a friendly country at the moment. And that's going to be one of the things. But again, it's about bringing it to market. Who is, like, you know, is the person, if you're using an LLM out of China or somewhere else that you haven't tested and you are building on that, because the interesting thing about OpenAI, what they're bringing, GPT-4, ChatGPT, most people are going to be building on, it's actually a platform. But if you're building on something that is questionable, you are liable if you bring something to market yourself. So just remember that. You know, you can fine tune bias out of things, you can put a framework on it, you can put the guardrails on it yourself. But just so people realise that, I think that's something that's really unclear at the moment, that where the liability lies, and just be super careful and keep an eye on it if you are thinking of bringing products to market.
So don't rush to try and commercialize it by kind of APIing in, you know, if you don't really know the consequences.
Just factor it into your risk profile of what you're actually doing. But also just be aware, like, you know, you build a product that's biased, you're probably going to get a massive backlash if it goes public, that if you get a lot of notoriety in it. And equally, if your competitors are building something a little more carefully and that works for everybody, you're probably going to get left behind. And the minute you build something like a model, you start commercializing it, it's like the worst form of tech debt. You know, it's very hard to go back and kind of start addressing your models when you're live in the system, and you know, you've got big headaches and you're putting out fires everywhere. You know, addressing bias, addressing issues that your competitors may have been more thoughtful in, can mean, you know, brand reputation can be can be ruined pretty quickly. So sometimes building something ethically, I know people kind of like, you know, it's a bit woke to do that. You know, people kind of roll their eyes, but to be honest, it's about building a better product. So I don't really feel we did that in SoapBox. We kind of actually did it even when we weren't being compelled to by the regulation. Before the regulation, because we were working with kids, we were working in education, and it was just the right thing to do. But it served us really well in our brand now. And I'd hate to rush that aspect and now be trying to fix it now. It would be really hard.
Thank you for that. No, that makes sense. Just kind of building on that then for you, Alan, I guess, as a company that's in software and it's in this space for a long time, you must have been ahead of the curve on thinking through some of these issues, and even there's probably been debates internally about, you know, APIing into ChatGPT of late, right? And whether there's areas that it can help you. You mentioned summarizing content.
Yeah, indeed. I guess the way we see it is that in the case of our specific application, it's not going to really move the needle for enterprises in their negotiations with suppliers. So it's like the risk may not be worth it, because you can't stand over what it may produce, right? So, but there are areas where we're looking at. It's an interesting example. Our customers love their brands. You know, we deal with big companies like Coca-Cola's and Nestle's and Siemens and Mercedes and the likes. So when they create new sourcing bots, they've always had a habit of naming them, and they kind of personalize them, and they have votes internally about what they should name it. And we've kind of always produced these kind of fairly standard icons for their bots. But what we put to them is that, look, we could use generative AI, so you could create a cartoon-like icon, and you can give it instructions around how you want it to use your brand colors and so on. And the quality of the icons it generates is quite astounding. And then now they're moving towards, you know, they want to have votes on the icons from generative AI that's produced. And it's like an interesting, fun application that's harmless, as long as we put the guardrails around it, so that they don't give them an open text input in the instruction that goes to Midjourney. Instead, you have a drop-down list of options. You're controlling the inputs, at least. You can't guarantee the outputs, but if you are ensuring it's a Pixar style or cartoon style, then you can be more confident that, okay, it's not going to generate something that will backfire badly.
And you're into male, female territory and age and sort of names, male names and female names and all this sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah, so you then have to look at, okay, how do we ensure this stays safe? Right, but at least if you can control and parameterize the inputs, then you can have greater confidence, and the risk that Patricia was talking about, you can try and mitigate it and use it in a kind of a novel and interesting way, so that your customers start socializing things internally. So, but again, not something that you say to your sales team, well, guys, we're going to increase prices now. It's like, so I think you've got to find maybe the edge cases that for your business, if you're a SaaS company, explore something that's lower risk and test it out, get in front of users. And then if it's working really well, then look at what's next and do something more ambitious. So that's our approach to it.
That makes sense. Changing tack slightly, right? So there's a feeling potentially in the room like this. We had GDPR, which was a big kind of impact on companies and in terms of regulation. This is a whole different kettle of fish, right? So if you're not, let's say, into AI or you haven't been into machine learning and you don't know much about this space, how do we prepare for it? So, do we try and educate ourselves more? Do we just stick our head in the sand? Do we, people in the room here, what do you think? Maybe start with you, Alan, and then we go across the room. So what would you think we should be doing?
First thing is to start playing around with it and just testing it out. And it's amazing. I think these tools really highlight creative thinkers. I sat around with colleagues and, we had a graphic designer and she's a very creative person. And she was able to use this new tool in a far more effective way than, bringing in concepts that are just like, I'd say, creative, somebody, a novelist or a painter, these kind of people who are creators and think outside the box. It's amazing the quality of output that's generated by somebody like that who can give very specific, clear instructions, and following up with descriptors like, generating photorealistic images using AGFA 5:4 film and a specific type of lighting. And so, it's people who understand how, what separates good and excellent and are able to describe it clearly and concisely and unambiguously. They actually have an advantage. So I would say that skill set for what's called prompt engineering now, that's going to become a very valuable skill set because not everyone's good at using these tools, and there's crash courses going around in how to. But I see people coming out of those crash courses, and there's still people who had the creative ideas before they went in and came out. At least they're being equipped to use them. But if you're not a creative thinker, we all know the people who, like you want to have a party and there's somebody who comes up with some crazy left field idea and has a team that's like, wow, I wouldn't have ever thought of that. And those kind of imaginative people, can you let them loose with these type of tools and just see where they take things.
So the quality of the question almost is what you're getting at.
Yeah, and they can be fairly concise prompts, but if you know the tricks around how to guide generative AI and in the direction you want it to go, then you can produce some amazing outputs.
Excellent. And I guess, Matt, building on that, if I may, right? So again, busy VC, lots of areas to be we talked about drones earlier, I think, with Jack, and so like lots of different sectors that you have to kind of upskill on. What are some of the things you do? Because you're busy, right? We're all busy. How do you kind of get up to speed on things like AI?
Yeah, I think just to add on the prompt engineering front, I mean, scary, but GPT models are pretty good at prompt engineering themselves. And I like AutoGPT. For those that don't know what AutoGPT is, it's an open experiment of autonomous usage of GPT-4 is what they title it. It's a software project that some developers came out with where the language models effectively control themselves and prompt themselves. You set them a task, you set them a role. So for me, I've tried these things and I've said, you're an early stage investor. I want you to look into, let's say, fintech ecosystem in the UK and give me some advice on which startups we should be investing in that space. And then I just say, I'll let you run for 100 iterations, and it will just start prompting itself 100 times. It'll say, okay, if I were an early stage investor looking into the fintech market in the UK, what would I need to understand? It will ask itself that, and then it will say, okay, here's the 10 things I'll need to understand. Let me deploy 10 versions of myself that each go in a different direction and do this research. And I left that running for about an hour, that program, and it created about 10 different files on my machine with a detailed breakdown of, for example, which areas of fintech have been growing faster than others, which sort of, founder backgrounds, what sort of companies are they coming from, what are the likely founders to invest in. And it's pretty good at that. And it's quite scary because we think that, okay, someone non-technical, how can you help yourself get through this AI, this AI dream that we're all in right now. Okay, teach yourself to use the tools, but the tools are starting to use themselves, which is quite scary. But yeah, I think myself, sorry, just to tie back to your actual question, Alan, because I was just building on other Alan's points there. How do I mean, luckily I have a software background, so I know how to run up a AutoGPT GitHub repository on my own machine, so I have the benefit of being able to test the tools that require slightly more computational skills myself. But my whole team are testing this stuff, and it doesn't take too much. The one piece of advice I would give is one thing GPTs are great at is transforming complex subjects into simple terminology. For example, like quantum computing, let's say, you ask ChatGPT, can you explain quantum computing to me? It's going to give you this very long description that's quite complex. You read it through, you'll probably be sat there a little bit, okay, I still don't really know what it means. And you just say, make it simpler. And if you don't understand it, make it simpler again. And keep going until you understand it. And it's really, really good at that stuff. So, I mean, you don't need to understand quantum computing to stay on top of AI technology, but using the tools themselves to help you teach, help you learn, is really valuable. And I'm sure Patricia and the stuff that they're doing over there is going to help future generations sort of, acclimatize to these tools better. But yeah, that's the advice I give.
Just building on that, right? So going off tack slightly, but primary schools and academia, right? I was kind of thinking about it. I have 2 kids that I can see checking out Google and Wikipedia for answers for homework, which directionally points them in the right direction. But the academic system, Patricia, maybe you could start with this one. In Ireland in particular, and UK will be very similar, as being all about rote learning. That's historically the way the systems have been operated, right? Whoever remembers the content, it's not about robust discussions with your teacher, it's about remembering content. This is going to have a profound impact on academic systems, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're in a safe space here, right? I can speak freely. The education system has probably been one of the most resistant to change, globally. The classroom has barely changed in the last 100 years. This is really messing with a lot of people's idea of how to educate, and it's kind of about time, I guess. Like it's going to be upended a little bit. So what you're seeing in the education system is people who are like horrified about what's happening. Plagiarism software doesn't work on generative AI. Yeah. So it's kind of having to rethink how they do it. My daughter just showed me today, actually, on Snapchat. Has anybody seen the Snapchat AI? That you actually have your own AI system. It's like a little bot you get to talk to, and they can help you with your homework, and they do all this stuff on their phone. They don't, it's not even ChatGPT. These guys are going to be, they're AI natives, like, at 13 if they're already doing this. So the idea is to rethink how you do assessment and how you gauge. And to be honest, a lot of people have been arguing for this for a very long time, that assessment is a very poor way. It's a slice of time. Doing a couple of assessments a year is really not very useful in an education system. So the idea of formative assessment, where you're assessing as kids learn, it's long been argued that creativity, collaboration, research, all these are actually what they call 21st century skills. So the way, getting somebody to write an essay, yes, that's one form of assessment, but it's literally not the only one. And more people are believing that probably one of the lesser needed skills going further into the 21st century, because to be honest, when you have a little bot on your phone that's going to tell you everything, do you really need to remember all the dates of whatever war, so if you could try, and a lot of people have been pushing for the same in maths, going given the fact that computers can do so much, why are we still doing everything from first principles? Should we be starting at a different level and allowing kids to spend those years learning different skill sets about how you work with computers, as opposed to how you try and replicate what the computer did from first principles and remember it and repeat it and write it all down so somebody can assess? It's the easiest way to assess. So I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is an absolute upending of the education system. There will be people that will embrace it, and there's other people who are going to fight it. But it doesn't make sense to fight it, because they have it on their phones. Unless you're going to bar every piece of technology, this is the future. It's not going anywhere. The horse is bolted, whatever cliche you want to use. So it's time to actually start tapping into the research that people have been talking about for a couple of years, saying a lot of people are kind of saying, okay, now we can finally change the education system because they don't have a choice. So yes, huge change. It's going to be exciting.
Makes sense. Alan, as a parent and former academic, right, you have a number of kids that are school-going age. Do you think differently about what they should focus on when they're learning? To go to Patricia's point, do you think things like creativity are more important than ever, or do you just send them upstairs and go do your homework, guys?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Patricia that the system did need major reform, and this will be the catalyst for that reform, because they do have to change now. And no, I think the education system should be looking at how it can leverage AI. And I would also agree that having exams at the end of the year, that's a slice in time. Yeah, you could have a bad day and your entire education in primary and secondary school is judged on a bad day on maths exam and leaving cert. Whereas, if you look at it conversely, we do need some systems of examination. Maybe AI can help with that and do it on a more continuous basis over a much longer term and get a better reflection of somebody's abilities. But other areas of education, like that we don't measure, like your ability to collaborate and so on, that maybe we can look into how we start structuring our education to support collaboration and do assessments in our collaborative abilities and so on. So yeah, it's systems ripe for change, so this will be the accelerant for that, and yeah, bring it on.
Excellent. Matt, anything to add?
I think maybe just a slight sidebar, but the this is all, we need to change the system. Yeah, obviously, assessments are broke. I think my computer science degree, I could have passed with GPT-4, all the coursework, all the exams easily done overnight. But what is really good is in terms of access to education, suddenly we have an AI tutor in our pockets for whatever socioeconomic background a child might come from. They can access MIT level, maybe not MIT degree level, but MIT standard of education instantly. And I'm really excited to live in a future where access to education is no longer something we have to hold behind private schools and things like that. That's, very excited.
I think that's a key point for places like Africa in particular, which has got huge populations, even countries like Nigeria, but a very weak kind of tertiary level academia, whereby you can use Coursera, Udemy, and now OpenAI to learn, and not worry about being credentialed. And I think those days they're almost like, I think McWilliams talked about this recently, about they're almost like brands that are just designed to keep people out. But I think, academia has some interesting.
I don't want to attack you here, but I think, isn't Nigeria one of the most successful in terms of academic performance and sort of integration into other societies in terms of wealth performance countries, one of the most successful African nations? I'm not sure if there's anyone in the room that knows the table of Nigerians versus other African nation performance, but I think I've heard before from some Nigerian friends of mine that they were top of the charts, but
could be right.
Maybe they are trying to put ideas in my head so that I can say it on a panel and influence other people in a room. So I'll go and speak to them and find out. But yeah,
it definitely wouldn't have lots of infrastructure and lots of physical.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry.
Udemy and Coursera and those sort of systems are very popular, no doubt about it.
I didn't hear you say infrastructure. My apologies.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to attack you on the panel.
It's all right.
That's very bad.
That's okay. We will take a few questions in a few minutes, right? So do, and I know the beer might be getting warm, Jack. So what do you want to do? Another 10 minutes, maybe? One more question, then we go to the floor. It sounds good. Jack, this is probably one that's kind of more relevant to people in the room, I guess. What advice would you give a startup if they're seeking investment? We touched on this a little bit earlier, but let me do a different question, actually. How should companies and employees adapt to the changing landscape? So maybe, Alan, I'll start with you on that. Again, we've touched on some of this earlier, but...
Yeah, this is an area where I think we see amongst our customers that there's concern over the future of work and what new technology is going to do to jobs and which positions will be lost and which new positions will be created. In the space we sell into is procurement. So many people working in procurement could be sourcing managers running auctions and RFQs and so on. And our message to them has been, well, you can automate most of that work. But procurement has always been under-resourced. So they've never done things like supplier relationship management or risk management, innovation discovery. They're always short on qualified suppliers. So there's plenty of work that humans can do that machines cannot do. So we always try to, from a tech vendor's perspective, I think you want to reassure people that there's no shortage of work for people. People aren't going to be out of jobs. The nature of their work will change. There are many skill sets that are becoming more important in the workplace. Softer skill sets, the kind of quantitative skill sets, actually, in some professions, they're under they're in more danger because it's easier for machines to be systematic in highly numerous areas. But so we've had some customers where we've been able to point to the fact that look, their headcount didn't change. They automated 40% of their sourcing activity, tens of thousands of sourcing events, but now their people are actually enjoying work more. Their staff retention increased because they're actually out there talking to suppliers and not saying we're going to, and not behind the scenes with an Excel document. They're doing more interesting work and they're enjoying their work more. So yeah, there are threats and opportunities, and I think on a case by case basis, you need to look at what we do see. Yeah, there's probably some application domains where there's a higher threat. The threat's bigger than the opportunity, and other areas where the opportunity is bigger than the threat. And over time, this will all fall out and become clearer what the implications are.
So kind of eliminate the grunt work is kind of one thing I've heard.
Take the robot out of human work. Let the robots do the robot work is kind of saying we come across. Yeah.
Matt, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it depends on size and sector of the business completely. Obviously, if you're a massive corporation built on some fundamental technology that you've been building for 10 years and it has a 2 million line code base, which is very much maintained to stand like that, and it will fall over if you try and redesign block one on the bottom floor. You do have to think, are there serious changes that the implication of large language models could make to my business? I think about industries like, I was speaking to someone from the audience, can't see where he is now, but about the RPA industry, robotic process automation. And, we think about tools that will basically go and scrape processes and automate like workflows that users might have to do. And I think basically LLMs will be able to change that industry quite heavily. And I think everyone who's a large existing incumbent in that space has to have some conversations with some smart LLM people about what the implications are for their business. But the best advice is just talk to the most intelligent person you know who's in that space. And if you don't know anyone, talk to the most intelligent person you know in any space and ask them who the most intelligent person they know in that space is. Might be this guy over here. Or
they might point you to ChatGPT. They might ask you to ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thanks. Patricia, just to conclude with you, I guess, I don't know, did you hear the question, but I guess I'm trying to explore this tension between, the press can be quite negative on AI about job losses, right? And obviously there's plenty of young people in the room at the start of their careers, right? So I guess we're just trying to unpack, how they should view kind of AI as a threat or opportunity, I guess.
I think there's a couple of things to be aware, given how fast the pace is going. So one is to just make sure you're shored up with your employees. If you own a company or you run a company, how they're using it, make sure they're uploading anything confidential because everybody's using it right now, even if they're telling you they're not. Look across your business about how you can leverage it for productivity. I know some companies are basically telling all their employees to use it and just find a way to save a couple hours a day and be more productive, coding, whether it's writing emails, content, marketing, research, whatever. So just know that if you don't do it, your competition probably is, and maybe they're gaining productivity, maybe they're doing more with less and being competitive. And then to really look across your organization how you can use AI to innovate. You can build on these platforms, ChatGPT, or you can build AI models yourself and look at it, because again, there is an explosion of funding, interest, development, and also we're at the tipping point where they're actually getting really good and useful. So is somebody going to eat your lunch if you don't? If you don't spend time, because a lot of times we're also too busy sometimes to look at innovating or how we can actually adopt these things, third-party AI tools, or build your own. But again, look, if you're not doing it, is your competition doing it, or is this new raft of products that are going to be built on top of these LLMs going to start automating some of the stuff you're doing? And will all of a sudden in a year's time, you're not looking, is somebody going to eat your lunch? And the idea is that so across the board, a lot of people have got their heads in the sand event. I know there's a lot of hype in the media, but equally people go, not really relevant to me. But I really would just have a brainstorm where people around in your company and just kick the tires on it. Are you sure it's not for you? Are you sure you can't leverage them? Because if you don't, just know that the person who does and the people who are paying attention and they are looking, they could be doing it and they could leave you for dust in another year or two if you're not paying attention. So.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Patricia. Anybody on the floor? I'll take the mic there actually, just in case anybody got any questions? You want to, Jack? Yeah, perfect. Yes, one at the back there.
Caroline down the back here.
Hi there. My name is Caroline and I work at BT. Alan, it was a question. It was a question about maybe one of the first things you said, that legislators need to start working quickly. Where are the first things they need to start looking at?
I suppose
The mic, yeah. Sorry, Jack.
I don't need to bring the wine glass, actually.
I think Patricia spoke to this also, but I think that specific use cases that are obvious and potentially very dangerous are, I would say, the natural starting point and the obvious starting point. And I would say that's maybe the easy part. That's where they are starting, which makes the most sense. But we need to see these things happening pretty quickly, because we're going to see egregious examples of abuse of these systems becoming public. It won't be just the Pope in a puffy jacket. It's going to get worse quickly, right? But then we'll be moving into grey areas where it's debatable as to certain activities are ethical or unethical, and people will have diverse opinions. And we can be clear on certain areas, but not so clear on many more areas. And that's where I fear that legislators will have a very difficult time keeping up. If they're finding it difficult and it's taking 2 years to protect us from the obvious and very bad negative use cases that are staring us in the face there, how long is it going to take them to address all the grey areas? And I don't see it. I see it being a Wild West for quite some time. So I'm not offering any hope or optimism on it. There isn't grounds for hope there, I don't think. But Trish might have other opinions on it, and maybe want to hand to her.
Did you hear the question? Okay, you heard the question.
I have a feeling that there is actually a lot. Sorry.
You heard the question, Patricia.
I have a feeling that the legislation is quite comprehensive. It does extend to the UK. So just on that, I don't know of any legislation that's been put to government in the UK. So, it's same with the US, but they are a little further ahead because they've already drafted the US Bill of Rights, AI Bill of Rights. So, I do think the EU AI Act is actually quite comprehensive in dealing with this. If somebody's going to do something illegal like fraudulent phishing, disinformation, stuff like that, any AI Act is not going to address that. So yeah, I would be interested if there was any progress, if anybody else had any progress in the UK, and I haven't heard of it yet.
Not sorry to put you on the spot as our UK representative. Do you know anything about UK regulation in this?
I do have an Irish passport as well. I am from the UK. No, I've not heard of any UK legislation as of yet. I tend not to look into the legislation and regulatory frameworks at the moment because I'm very pessimistic about it. I maybe don't want to talk about it right now because I don't want everyone to be depressed after they leave the final bit of the talk. But I think the EU AI Act is good. But this is a tool that will advance or has advanced faster than any other technological tool we've ever seen so far. And the implications of a new industry being regulated is almost always, you know, a process that takes a decade to reach an appropriate level of legislation. And, you know, the nefarious actions that you were describing there, Patricia, I think there is seriously within 12 to 18 months, it's not infeasible that we could see mass problems from, you know, nefarious actors in these spaces. But there's loads of great stuff too, so we'll be fine.
I mean, actually, just on that for 1 second, whoever wants to answer this, if they can. I mean, is it possible for AI to tell stuff that's AI, right? So
watermarking is the type of watermarking they're used. Unfortunately, it's a bit of an arms race, right? So that you could include watermarks in generative AI, but you could also have AI to remove watermarks. So,
okay, yeah. The same with content, right? People are now asking for stuff and they're saying, you know, can we give me a quote for an article, but I don't want any AI generated stuff because they're obviously getting hit with.
Yeah, and I think content generation, I mean, that's a prime target for an industry that will be completely upended. Stock photography is another area, you know, who's going to pay hundreds of dollars to Getty? It's not going to happen. We'll see court cases, of course, you know, where the originators of many materials that were used in the training set for generative AI, they're going to look for a slice of the income that some of these vendors are getting, because ultimately the training set's relying on some work others have done. But it's yeah, we see where that goes.
I'll give one niche example, and then we'll maybe go back to the floor. But like content, so again, I'm in software, and B2B marketing has a lot of content creation and inbound marketing, different technical domains, and you'd have had this issue with Keelvar trying to create content that's high quality, and you might have got one blog a month, let's say, and obviously as you raise more money, you were able to increase the frequency because you had more people, but you could literally now get it to spit out blogs like that, which is pulling from other sources. So you could potentially produce 20 blogs, whatever number a day, which then goes in to create more noise, and it's piggybacking on everybody else's content.
That's going on the internet until the next training set for next iteration, right? So yeah, we're going to see an explosion in auto-generated content, and not all of it will be thoughtfully created. So the noise factor is increasing.
That's pretty bleak. I tend to agree. Jack, do we need to wrap up, or maybe one more question? Go for it.
One last question here. It's my husband. So.
That was fantastic, guys. Thanks so much. So I'm actually a lecturer in medical technology just down the road at Queen Mary University, and I teach kind of engineering students about medical imaging and stuff. I did just get asked last week to sprinkle a bit more machine learning in there because the students want it. But going to what you were talking about how it's going to upend the education system, I agree with every point that every one of you made. It's due a reckoning anyway. But we've already been removing we were trialing removing essays from our examinations and from our assessments altogether, and relying on formative assessments. So we've run an exercise where we've asked students to generate a review article on, say, steel or something, and then come back to us and critique the article, because it's invariably kind of shite. As in, like, it's good at really explaining really simply, but all the references are wrong. We've also done prompt testing as well. So we've told the class, right, whoever can make the best essay, and then we all judge it together. So I think, I guess, to come to my question, talking about the arms race, you were saying, is it more important that we educate the students to, and everyone really, to expect that some things they're seeing are AI generated, and to almost assume it's a computer rather than a human these days, if it's online? Anyone at all?
You want to take the mic there, Robert? I don't want to answer. Thanks. Great question, by the way.
I think that's a great point, right? And that we should be just moving to a stage where it's going to become normalized. We actually expect it, and it's been that way in some domains. Like, I'd say financial reporting. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to read a report on some quarterly results of some firm. it's been auto-generated for years, right? But they didn't try to hide the fact. They're just kind of taking numbers out of virtually financial results and wrapping text around them. It's expected, but likewise in the student context, instead of asking people to, if we're looking at AI as a new tool, when it's just as the pen was a tool or a computer was a tool, it's like, who's going to use this tool well? And that's kind of where our workshops in Keelvar we're looking at is who's got a knife and an understanding for a prompt engineer, who's a natural prompt engineer, right? And some people, and it tends to be the creative thinkers who just come up with concepts that others tend, there's some people who write books and most people read them. The people who come up with new characters in a book, and when you see a movie and screenwriting is done really well, and there's a character, like in Succession, the characters are drawn so that you can recognize the character flaws that are symptomatic, and that there's kind of this correlation between the character flaws you see in those well-drawn characters and the set of flaws that they have, right? So it makes that character realistic. So if somebody has a talent for screenwriting can create that new character, Logan Roy, who came up with Logan Roy and who drew that character? It came up in someone's mind. Similarly, if you're using prompt engineering, who are the people out there who can identify the key defining characteristics or features that, when combined, generate something really interesting and unique? And that's a talent. It's a real talent, and it will get rewarded in this new era of generative AI. And the content, people will still expect good content, right? People won't read rubbish content. But what you start figuring out is that I suppose the highest earners in content generation will be the very thoughtful prompt engineers, and it will be a smaller number of people generating far greater incomes because they're really talented at it. And so if you're to say glass half full, we might start seeing better quality content. There's a lot of rubbish content out there that's human generated. So let's be up to
on that note, we might leave it, and we might finish on a high note. If everyone could put their hands together, big thank you for coming. Finally, a big word of thanks to Peter and Jack and Astrid from BT and AWS for watching tonight. This is the best part of the night, so Jack's going to tell everyone where the free bar is at, the drinks here, and where's the bar afterwards?
White Horse, just around the block, as New Yorker might say.
There you go. So White Horse around the block. So have a drink afterwards, everyone, but if you want to go for another one afterwards, White Horse around the block. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan.